Good afternoon to the Virtual Fintech Forum. Today, we are going to talk to you about breaking into the news cycle, and we are hoping to bring you some practical tips and tricks on doing PR in a very complicated world. My name is Darryl Wright. I'm the Managing Director for APAC here at Cognito, and I've got with me Dan Bradley.
Hi there, yeah, I'm Director and Head of the Hong Kong office for Cognito.
And just to give you a quick intro to Cognito, we are a global integrated PR and digital marketing agency with headquarters in London and offices around the world, including here in Singapore, where I'm based, and in Hong Kong, where Dan is based.
Cool. So what we're going to cover in the next half hour, three main things that we want to go through with you. Firstly, taking a look at the media landscape and why it's not one size fits all. And then having a bit of a review of the classic conundrum of why it is that what journalists want isn't necessarily what you want to get out of the media coverage. That's all to create the context and set the scene. And then we're going to move into some tips and tricks for making the most of your interactions with media. Altogether, our aim with this is to give you a better sense of what's required to get your story into a very busy and complex news cycle. And that's a challenge that frankly is getting harder by the day. So making the most of the opportunity you have is really important, and that's what we're hoping to give you a sense of today.
Okay, so just to kick us off on a few main points, there is a complicated series of things we need to consider when we're doing any PR or marketing activities, and they can be put into four main areas. There's paid, earned, shared, and owned. And obviously paid is where digital marketing comes in and you're paying for advertising. Shared media is your own user-generated content like social media, and owned we classify under websites, direct marketing, and things that you control. Today, though, we're going to focus mostly on the earned media, so media coverage in newspapers, magazines, TV, radio, etc. Mainly because we have a very short period of time to deal with this today, and we can take questions on other areas if you wish to later on. But that's just to kind of outline the major areas, and earned is where we'll focus our attention. If you go to the next slide, Dan. Before we get into it, just working with you on the media landscape in Asia specifically, there is a complicated range of jurisdictions, languages. Newspapers are in the thousands, magazines more than that, and then it gets exponentially bigger from there. Of course, the exploding online media is something that we all are aware of, and we need to be taking into consideration the size and scope of the media as it stands here in Asia. Of course, there is billions of people that live here as well, so it's a very complex market. A lot of people we come into contact, especially those in the UK and US markets, tend to see Asia as a one-size-fits-all type of experience for them, and not appreciating how complex the size and scope of it is in terms of the number of jurisdictions that we have to deal with, and the number of media that exist within those jurisdictions, and the cultural sensitivities that also vary widely as you go from east to west and north to south. So it's really important that you as a company understand this landscape and the complexities that it brings, and that you focus your media activities and your PR activities really on the things that matter most to you and to the audiences you're trying to communicate with. Next slide, Dan. So just as another quick point around the media, for those of you, a lot of these you will have come into contact with, but it's good to break them down into the various segments that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. So just going from the top in a clockwise direction, we've got international trade media. You as FinTech professionals will have come into contact with many of these publications on a day-to-day basis. And these are ones that exist in the finance and FinTech space across the world. So they're not specific to one country or one jurisdiction. And that will then inform you as to how your message should be tailored. If you go to the next section, you've got local business media here. So in Hong Kong, South China Morning Post, in Singapore, Straits and Business Times, in Thailand as well, an example of Bangkok Post. And of course, there are thousands of others in each jurisdiction across Asia. And these are dealing with local issues and dealing with a local audience. At the bottom, you've got the regional trade media. So these are titles that are specifically geared towards Asian finance and fintech. And you'll find that they will pick up a lot of the Asia-focused news, regulatory movements and developments in the region, and fintech innovation and progress that specifically focuses on Asia. And then on the left are many of the names that I'm sure everybody here will be aware of. These are the global business media or the international business media. So, the usual suspects of Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, Reuters, Bloomberg, etc. And these are telling a story to a global audience on global issues. So your business fits in the middle. And when you're thinking about the kind of media that you want to attract, you have to think about the audience that is going to hear these messages and read your stories, and think about how to tailor those messages to fit the media, which eventually fits the audience. And so this is really important for anybody starting out or continuing with their PR activities to understand. Next slide, Dan.
Cool, and I think that's a really important point, as Sarah says, that it's a really fragmented media landscape, and it's a really important thing to understand the publications that you're targeting and what interests them. But what's equally, if not more important to understand, is that there's also a complex interrelation between companies and the journalists that are reporting on them. The point here is that there's often a mismatch, frankly, between what a company wants to get out of meeting a journalist and being written about by a journalist, and what that journalist actually wants to get out of the meeting. So just to pick a few examples, companies typically obviously want to demonstrate their expertise, discuss their successes, and frankly not talk about things that may not have gone quite so well. They're out there to promote a new or existing product or service. That's obviously a huge part of what they do. They've got to get their product or services known by a wide audience, and media is still a very important way to do that. And frankly, it can be as simple as creating profile for individuals and the firm itself. Obviously, often as a startup company, that's really key. And media can be a very powerful way to get your company known, especially when you just started out. Now, on the other hand, journalists frankly have a completely different set of priorities here. They're looking to get stories that their peers don't get. They're out to find that scoop. They're also wanting to deliver news that is current, that is news that's fresh or topical. And they want to provide insightful information in a very clear way to their readers. Now, at first glance, none of those things on the left really match up very neatly with the things on the right. But the critical thing when launching any media relations campaign is to kind of work out what goes in the middle to make these two sides marry up and to make that relationship work most effectively. Now, that all being said, the situation, as I think we've alluded to a few times already, the situation that, the environment in which we do media relations is getting more and more complicated. Reuters journalist told me recently that the bar for what qualifies as a story, so what story will actually make the grade to get into a Reuters article, that bar is getting higher and higher. Journalists know their audiences very, very well, and they know where their interests are shifting to. SCMP, for example, tracks every story to see how popular it is. And it's less likely to run similar stories if the readership for a story they've done before on that topic was low. It's just a fact of life now. There's also an extraordinary amount of geopolitics to report on, obviously. There's a hell of a lot going on in the world right now, and that's not even mentioning COVID. So this all means, as my friend from Reuters said, what made the cut recently may just not do so anymore. So that's quite a long-winded way of saying that it's tough to get your story covered these days, and that difficulty is only going to increase. Now, having just talked about the challenges in breaking into the news cycle, we can now look at some tips for how you can overcome those challenges and crack the news cycle and get your story out there. I think the most important one that we can go through is to take a long-term approach at it. It's incredibly important to invest time getting to know the reporters that cover your sector and understand the stories that they're looking for. Now, often this will require taking a step back and putting your news into a wider context. So, for example, an insurance consultant that we worked with recently launched a new product, which by itself, frankly, wasn't going to get a huge amount of interest. It's one of those product launch announcements which are very technical, very detailed, very important in themselves, but which at first glance are not very easy to understand. When we pointed out, though, that the value that this new piece of kit had for the industry, the challenge it solved, and the way it was going to make things a huge lot better for the end users, that's the point at which the reporters started to get interested in the story. So it ceased to be a simple technology story, a simple new product story, and it started to become one about the transformation of the insurance industry itself. So taking a step back and putting your news into the wider context of the industry is really, really important. And that goes to the other points about informing and educating. The facts are on the internet. Journalists are very clever people. They can find these things out, but they can find most things out for themselves. But what do you have, or what does your product do that is something different and something new, something that a reporter can't understand or get facts on elsewhere? And it's all absolutely critical. I think in many ways it all boils down to the final point on this slide, which is about talking about the benefits of what it is that you do or the product you sell, and not its features, because those benefits have wider repercussions and wider interest levels, and that is what sparks the interest and what will engage the journalist's own readers. And we have to remember always, as a journalist is thinking about their readers at all times. Darryl alluded to this earlier with the different segmentation of the media types. Journalists have clear idea of who their audience is and what they're interested in. And that's why media relations can be so challenging, because you are trying to communicate a story to a particular audience, but it has to go through via a journalist in between. So understanding who they are by building a long-term relationship, putting your story into context, and being there to educate and inform with insightful commentary maximises your chances of getting supportive coverage when and where you want it. Now, that's quite a lot of things to do all at once, I guess, but practice really does make perfect with it. We tell our clients all the time to invest time and resource in training spokespeople. It's really important to do that, to identify the right people to be promoting your company, and make the effort to train them up and give them the skills that they need to do so in the most effective way. But also, as I said previously, to take time to meet the reporters and get to understand their individual interests. This is particularly the case still in Asia. Granted, other parts of the world, particularly Europe, reporters simply have less time now to go out and about and meet people and just sit down and have a conversation. It's starting to be a bit like that here, but we're very lucky that we do still have this personal connection possible. And that is invaluable, and we should all take the opportunity to do that, because it's through doing that that you get to understand their individual interests and their individual topic areas. That really leads me on to the other point. I think being realistic about what's possible is crucial. Not every story that a company generates, frankly, is going to be front page news. It just won't be. But sometimes there are really interesting and significant nuggets of information in what companies are doing. So a great example that I quite like talking about, because this one that I was involved in, is work we did recently with a FinTech company who were working with some Southeast Asian banks on their LIBOR transition. Now, that by itself was quite a niche story. The technical details of the LIBOR transition are fairly complex, and it was also geographically limited to one country in Southeast Asia. But we also knew that one of the reporters at South China Morning Post was very interested in LIBOR transition. We also know that she likes technical stories. So we approached her with it and worked with her to transform that story into one about Hong Kong's own transition from LIBOR and the process that we're going through here. That story, while it was nothing really to do with the original story that kind of we went to her with, it still processed our client throughout, positioned them incredibly well, and that actually did make the front page. So it just goes to show, like, knowing the people involved, kind of knowing when to go with them with what story, really, really pays it.
Thanks, Dan. So we've got one more slide, and then I'm going to do a little bit of a Q&A with Dan, but also there is a Q&A function, which I'm sure some of you will be aware of, but you should see it in front of you. If you've got any questions and you'd like to post them, please do so now. Having said that, I will follow on with the short Q&A session with Dan, so that we get some of the maximum benefit of talking to him and his experience today. Before we do that, though, I just want to say a few more words on the integrated model. So we started off by putting this slide up around the paid, earned, shared, and owned model of working within the PR and marketing activities that any company would want to do. What's really important here to remember is that earned media, as Dan has just said, is something that is becoming more challenging for any company to do successfully, as the clamor for attention increases in general across the market. But at the same time, we're also experiencing a decline in the number of newspapers and publications that are out there. So we need to find other ways to present our story. And of course, paid advertising has always been there. It's changed because of the way that advertising is now working with the advent of online advertising. Shared media, of course, this is something that you can control, something that you should be doing as a part of your day-to-day in order to share your message in other channels, such as on social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, depending on your company. And then owned media, of course, you'll all have a website, but there's a wide variety of quality and consistency as well, with companies using that owned real estate effectively by making sure that the content is up to date, which is and relevant, and also that it's being used in the right ways to reach your audience and present a really positive view to the world about your company. So I just think that, as I said, we are an integrated agency, and we do provide all of the services that you'll see on here. And over time, since the digital world has developed, it's become clearer and clearer to us that the space between the media and the digital world has really shrunk and actually disappeared. In fact, there's quite a lot of overlap these days with regards to the different areas around the paid, earned, shared, and owned model. And so an effective way, or in a simplistic explanation of how to do this, is to try to balance the way that you are spending and investing across your PR and marketing activities, so that you do get the benefit of this overlap that we see in the market between the paid, the earned, the shared, and the owned space. Of course, we could talk about this for a lot longer than we have today to speak. So again, if you've got any questions, please pop them in the Q&A. But I'll just kick off. Dan, question for you, which constantly comes up. And that is, what should companies be doing with regards to investing in PR? How much should companies be investing, in your experience?
Well, you might disagree on this, because I was going to say, I don't think it's necessarily, there's no right dollar figure for it, basically. I think companies need to look at what they want to get out of PR first, what their goal is. Are they trying to break into a new market? Are they trying to promote a new service? Are they trying to get better known than their competitors? Are they trying to paint perceptions of themselves, and then work a program from that? It's as how long is a piece of string question for me. You can spend very little on PR, but you will get very few results on it. Equally, you can spend quite a lot of PR, but unless you've thought about it very carefully and come up with a structured and very strategic plan for where you want to put that money and why, then arguably it's wasted, particularly if you haven't set in place any kind of reporting metrics for it, which is the other side of the coin. Whatever PR program you do put in place should also have an ability to rate itself and rank itself and improve itself as you go through it. One thing that people do have a habit of doing is small kind of taster projects. So they'll do a little bit of PR here, a little bit there, and a little bit elsewhere, and that can get good results. But one client actually characterised that as a hit and run approach, which is a bit graphic, but it does make the point quite neatly to me, which is you do some PR and then you run away, you disappear and you're never seen again. And what that means is all the relationships you build, all the goodwill you create with the journalists, all the knowledge base that they had from that interaction with you, it's all disappeared if you decide to go and when you come back. So I think duck the question there on actually having a dollar term in there, because it really does depend on what you're trying to get out of it and the end goal that you're looking for. But equally, it should be done in a structured and consistent way over a longer period of time, and then we can work out the budget from that.
And so maybe as a follow-up to that, you mentioned metrics. So what are some of the tools or techniques to measuring PR and ultimately return on investment?
Well, the classic one obviously is AVI, which is basically very crudely looking at the space in the newspaper, for example, that the article you're mentioning took, and working out how much getting that equivalent space would cost if you place an advert. That's a really blunt instrument way of doing it. What we prefer to do is much more nuanced ways that frankly are more tailored to the company itself and their goals. And going back to what I was saying earlier, every PR campaign at the beginning, it should be very clear what the aim is for this. And actually, measurement should be part of that process right at the beginning, because how else are you going to measure the success of it? So the success metrics will be different each time. That process may frankly involve doing a bit of work before you launch your PR campaign, say doing a benchmarking study to see how you match up against your competitors right now. And then after 6 months or a year of doing your PR campaign, you can then repeat that study, right, and see how well you've come. And that's critical, really, because especially where, I've been in-house, many of you have been in-house, a lot of us have been in-house, we know what the budgets are like, we know the pressure they're under and the justification they're under, and we also know that the bosses who sign off those budgets, they need a numerical number to go on it. That was why AVE is so popular, because it gives you a simple dollar term. There are other ways of getting to that dollar term, of getting to a sense of the value that your money's being put into. But I think they have to be very tailored and very matched to the program that we're putting in place.
Okay, we'll have a audience member asking questions. So Kiri Sinclair asks, how can corporates and fintechs best tap into influencers for B2B messaging?
Very good question, Kiri, and something Darryl and I were talking about earlier on. Get to know them, I think. It's not as simple, really, is it, as KOLs in retail. I think you have the higher profile generally. It's easy to associate with the brand, but there are a whole bunch of people out there, and at Cognitive we've even created a database of influence, which actually is designed exactly to map out different financial influencers, what they do, what their reach is, where their interest levels are, to make it easier for financial services companies to kind of matchmake almost with the right influence for them. So you might have a thoughts on that.
So I think as you say, the universe of fintech or corporate influencers is minuscule comparatively to the health and well-being or lifestyle guys that you see on Instagram, for example, but it doesn't mean they don't exist. I think you get in Singapore, at least my experience has been that you get some bloggers who are interested in finance and providing an independent view, and over time they've become well respected and followed, and have created a number of different websites that people do pay into in order to get their content published. But there is a small sort of burgeoning industry, at least in Singapore and some in Hong Kong as well, that you are able to tap into. So I think it's a good, it's one thing that we can consider as part of a integrated campaign. I would not see it being the be all and end all of a campaign. It's more as a module within a broader integrated campaign that you might want to follow up on. Okay, if there are any more questions, please tap them in. Maybe another one from me just to get us, we're just about 4 minutes from the end. How has the pandemic impacted your work in promoting brands, Dan? Positive or negative? Positive or negative?
I was going to say, it depends which stage of the pandemic you're asking that question, because when it first kicked off, what was it like? I don't remember now, honestly, early last year, there was a definite period of clients kind of taking a bit of a breath, quite rightly, to think, how serious is this? What is the impact going to be on a business? What do we need to do to support our colleagues? So there was definitely around February, March time, a bit of a step back from activities, but actually there's huge amounts has happened since. I think that there's been a real pivot to different ways of working to start with, which is kind of the most basic thing to say, as we all know that. But actually that has really forced us to change the way that we do media relations. I said earlier, quite cheerfully, that in Asia, the whole kind of meet and greets with reporters still happens, and it's still a very important part of the mix here. That obviously couldn't happen for a long time. We would normally do lots of in-person, face-to-face things like roundtables or drinks events for clients. None of that's possible, obviously, but we switched them all online, and I think we actually did that very quickly and created new forums for interaction between journalists and our clients. Personally, I don't think any of those is quite as good as doing it in person, but actually I've been very impressed by how successful they've been. I think that kind of stuff's here to stay. And there have been an awful lot of COVID-related stories that have come through. So we've been working with a lot of the consultancies who have had some fascinating stories about how the banks have re-engineered themselves or need to re-engineer themselves to address, to be able to still serve their customers in this environment. Insurance, I think, is a fascinating one because COVID is just accelerating processes which were kind of there anyway, but not really moving very fast. But the insurance industry is now really transforming, and that's as a result of COVID. But from a media relations point of view, there's a huge amount of things to talk about there. There's a huge amount of stories we can create for our clients. And I don't think that's changing, right? Countries going in and out of lockdown, so the whole process by which we work and the things that we're talking about are still changing as a result. So yeah, we're getting used to that constant shifting of gears and pivoting very quickly.
Okay, thank you. Maybe one last question. We talked about it in brief earlier, around the decline of publications in general on the media side. How are you dealing with that in terms of helping your clients to ensure that their story is heard in a world where the media is a shallower pool?
Well, I think it goes back to, if I can manage it, if it goes back to what you were talking about, the integrated models, where that's, I mean, if we zone in to start with on point of your question, which is yes, newspapers are closing, but it's not newspapers are closing, but if they're not closing, then they staff are fewer and far between and having to do more. I mean, this is a trend that happened in Europe, years and years ago, and the death of the newspaper was announced probably in the mid-90s. It's still not quite happened yet. But the point is that journalists are having to do more with less resource. So the more that you can do to help reporters, the better. If you can get a reputation as being a company that always responds quickly to reporters, always gives them the information they need, or frankly says, no, I don't have that information, but I know somebody who does, then you can still keep up a very close relationship and still actually you become the person that they want to go to, sorry, that reporter wants to go to. So you can actually solidify your media coverage. But you do have to be aware of the constraints and the difficulties that they're working under. Like everybody, really, everybody's have to do more with less, but reporters especially. But in media relations, you do have an ability to help, and it's human nature to build a good relationship that works two ways. But that said, yes, we've got, there's loads of things on this slide here that you can do to kind of supplement that own media where that is harder to gain. I think I'm whittling on about this quite a lot, but it's the lines are massively blurring between all of these things, frankly. And what is very interesting to do is maybe involve some journalists in some of your own content, because it'll give it a kind of a sheen of professionalism, if you like, but it also gives the journalists another outlet, another thing that they're doing, and it just creates a much more interesting piece of content for your clients to read.
Fantastic. We have run out of time, and people are leaving. I can see the numbers kind of ticking down. We had about 130 or 40 people join us today. So thank you very much for everybody who did join, and for your questions and for listening. If you want to get in touch with us, there's a handy QR code there. You can literally snap that on your phone and get Dan's emails, and get in touch anytime. And it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, everybody.